I'm indifferent.
I'm believing God.
To the existence of
God is not judging them.
I don't have proof.
I don't know how to pray.
They're judging themselves.
You know, where is God in all of this? This is my home.
God exists.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm?
I don't pledge allegiance to anything.
I don't pray.
Only to God.
If there was a God,
And I thought,
I just have this understanding that life is hard.
he could never love me after this.
God is still good.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to the Maybe God podcast. I'm your host, Eric Huffman. If you are new here, please be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell, of course, so you don't miss any of our new and upcoming weekly content that's always aimed at helping hopeful skeptics and doubtful believers have deeper conversations by asking some better questions. Now, for a few weeks, we've been talking to some amazing experts who've been providing really practical advice on all things marriage and sex and relationships. And today we're going to switch gears just a little bit and focus exclusively on singles and the modern dating scene. Today, joining us are the hosts of a very popular podcast called The Heart of Dating. And we have with us Kait and JJ Tomlin. Kait is an author and relationship coach who launched The Heart of Dating back in 2018 when she was single, and then she met and married JJ. And together they have opened up on their podcast about their own struggles with abusive relationships and rejection and sex, among other things. And they've helped thousands of singles navigate the increasingly frustrating world of dating. So without any further delay, let's dig right in. Welcome to the Maybe God podcast, Kait and JJ Tomlin. So glad y'all are here.
So glad to be here, Eric. I loved hearing that bio read together. That was fun.
I know. Well, the whole intro, like together, I'm like, can we just contract Eric to do our intro and replace a few words?
Voice.
I know.
I'm available. I'll have my people get in touch with your people and we'll make it happen. Now, thank y'all for being here. And if I understand this correctly, if Google's not a liar, you guys have recently celebrated 1 year as husband and wife. Is that right?
Yes, yesterday. Yesterday officially.
Yes.
When it was as of when we're recording this. So yeah, at the end of August, 1 year.
Awesome.
So we are not marriage experts. We're way more the singleness and dating experts than marriage at this point.
Yeah.
I like to tell people that because we're only 1 year into it.
Well, if the adage is true that the first year is the hardest, what does the future look like for you guys?
It can only go up, I hope.
That's
for
great.
us, we always tell people we're like the crazy people that we felt God calling us to work together as we do. And so we started our marriage, moved in together, and worked together in a 600 square foot apartment with 2 dogs. And, I'm not sure I would recommend exactly doing all of those things that we did, but it was certainly stretching and growing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How you doing, JJ? How you feel? You got something you want to say, or?
No, I'm good. I mean,
You look like you have a lot of thoughts going through your mind.
no, I always reminisce, and I'll look back and cherish those memories, even though they were pretty challenging at times.
I'll look back and cherish those memories one day, like a long time from now. Well, let's kind of go back a little further into y'all's story, and not just as a couple, but individually. Kait, talk to us about how you got into coaching singles.
Yeah. So if you had said to me about 7 or 8 years ago, Kait Warman, my previous name, like you are going to be coaching single people and helping them to date, I would have laughed hysterically and been like, that will never happen ever. Like that is not me. Even if God calls me, I just don't think that could be me. No. So I was very adamant about never being that person. And yet about 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago, I went through another massive heartbreak. And so my story has to do with a lot of dating situations I'm sure we'll get into. But so after that heartbreak, I kind of faced a choice of whether to kind of just like let this heartbreak destroy me and ask all the questions of what if, go down that downward spiral as many people do, asking, what if I did this differently? Or what about that? Or I should have done that. And for the first time in my dating history, I really decided to not do that. And instead, I focused on what God wanted me to do to move forward. So I say that to people, don't focus on the why, focus on what to do to move forward. You can focus on the why later, like the reflection of yourself later on. But needless to say, I did that in that season. And in pressing into God after that heartbreak, and after so many countless heartbreaks before that and horrible relationships, I started feeling God called me to start a podcast And I thought it was a little crazy because at the time I wasn't even fully a podcast listener. I was like not that big into podcasts. This is 2017 when this happened. And so I was like, really? You want me to start a podcast? I've never interviewed anyone. Like, what do you mean you want me to start a podcast? And so I felt that on my heart. And as I pressed in deeper and asked God what this podcast was going to be about, if I was to start it, it was so clear that he was leaning me to talk about dating. And Eric, I'll tell you, I didn't want it to be about dating at all. I was like, God, I think you're like choosing the wrong person, you know? I think maybe you have the wrong girl, like maybe somebody else. Like, have you seen my dating life and my history? And like, really, you want me?
Like Moses at the burning bush. Anyone but me.
Exactly. Anyone else, literally, could there be? And, you know, as I've reflected later in my life now, I look back and I see how ironic it is that so many instances in the Bible we see God choosing like the unexpected person who is very much like, no, I don't want to do this, or like, why are you choosing me? This is not like my kind of job. Like, why are you? I'm not the girl for the job. I'm not the guy for the job. And you see that over and over. And God's like, no, you're good for it. I'm choosing you. I see more than you can see, you know? And so I started this podcast really out of obedience. And I was scared. I was like, what are people going to think when I share my story? And what was awesome was God started building a confidence within me to be vulnerable and share parts of my story that I had never shared publicly. I also was really adamant about asking the questions that nobody asks, you know, and I know, Eric, you're a pastor, so this is no doc on pastors by any chance. But I do find that there aren't that many singleness sermons or like dating sermons, right? It's just not as found. And if it does happen, it might be like a singles relationship series like once a year or something like that. But if you are single, you're like looking for that content all the time. Sure. And so during my dating season, I like researched every podcast, every book I could find on Christian dating, which also, spoiler, there for every like almost 250 marriage books, there's one book on dating. Yeah. And that doesn't even mean it's like a Christian dating book, okay? Right. So there are so many more marriage books than there are dating. And so for me, I was like, all right, God, you know what? I'm going to use this opportunity to ask the questions that all of my fellow singles are thinking, and we all want to know the answers to. And so that's what I did. I started the Heart of Dating podcast asking these hard questions to pastors and speakers and authors and people I admired. And it was through that God impressed on my heart, like, this is your biggest passion. And it is my biggest passion. And so through that, I started getting excited to coach others because I realized through my own vulnerability, I had learned so much, and it's not about having it all together. Like, therapists are awesome, but the therapist still needs their own therapist, right? So it's not that the therapist is perfect at everything they're teaching. They're still learning and growing. They just have better systems in place. And so I was like, okay, I want to help other people do the things that I did in my singleness season. And so that's kind of what led me to being a coach after starting Heart of Dating.
So the podcast came, that's okay. The podcast came first, and then the coaching sort of came from the podcast experience you were having and the reach.
The coaching and then programs and events and all of those fun things.
Now, usually there's like clues in terms of what you're proficient in or what you've shown fruitfulness in the past. Are you the kind of girl whose friends go to for advice, or like when you talk about things like relationships and dating before the podcast, like was it something where you just had that sort of natural gifting?
I would say to an extent, yes, but you have to keep in mind that only in the few previous years before I started Heart of Dating, because before that, my dating life was a mess. So people wouldn't necessarily come to me for advice per se.
Tell me what not to do.
Because I wasn't really, I'll be like, let me tell you what you shouldn't do by my example, which was a lot of my teaching too. Like, hey, I totally get where you're going through. Let me help you to not do the same thing I did, because you're in a friendationship. I've been there. This is not going to end well. Like a
friendationship.
A friend that is like, this happens a lot in the church. It's a friend that feels more like you have more feelings for them, or they may have feelings for you, but nobody's expressing it. So you become in this friendationship where one or both of you actually have feelings, but nobody's willing to say anything
Yeah.
about it.
There's
Okay.
a book
And
title
so,
for you there. You can
yeah, exactly.
trademark that.
Relationship 101.
Okay, well, that's really fascinating. And if you wouldn't mind, and I promise JJ will come full circle, come around to you.
Oh, you're good.
But Kate, if you wouldn't mind talking about some of those, you mentioned how years before the podcast, dating for you
Yeah.
was hard or was a mess in your words. Tell us a little
Yeah.
bit more about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Totally. So my parents did let me start dating a little on the earlier side. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this age, but I started dating around the age of 14. And I dated for 10 years back to back. And when I look back from 14 to 24, I'm 34 now, I did not stop dating at all in those 10 years of dating. And a lot of this also tied back to some childhood wounds that I've now since seen and reconciled with, that I was missing a kind of love that I really wanted in my familial dynamic. And I wanted to be seen so badly in my familial dynamic that one of the things I turned to was men. And from a young age, I was like that quote unquote boy crazy kind of girl. And so you like hear these like labels we put on people, but there's always reasons why people have like they're more the performer, they're the teacher's pet, and I was also the teacher's pet. Okay, so but that was like a performance side of me. I wanted to be seen, I wanted to be the best, and the same with guys, but in a way I wanted more of a romantic love, a tender love that I wasn't necessarily getting in my familial dynamic. And I was a hopeless romantic at heart. And so from an early age, I really, really loved boys. And then when I was able to actually date, started dating and didn't stop dating. I had, at the age of 15 to 16, I had like 16 boyfriends that year, just flew through them one after the other. Don't recommend that. And then I had a long-term 5-year relationship. I broke up with him, jumped immediately the next month into a new relationship, broke up with him. Then I got into a really horrible 2.5-year abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And that relationship was abusive in every way. It started emotionally abusive and through time became verbally and physically abusive.
How old were you at that point, Kate?
I was about 21
Okay.
around that time. Yeah.
Did that start off good?
It started off okay. A lot of my relationships started off where I wanted the guy to like me so badly. I just wanted to prove like I could be the best. And so I performed a lot in dating. And I was doing that with this guy and he thought I was amazing and we had this connection. And it started off pretty like awesome to your point, but it wasn't long into it that I started realizing and seeing him flirt blatantly with women in front of me. And so part of that relationship was there's a lot of cheating involved.
Okay.
Like a lot of cheating. And a lot of lying, manipulation. And so I started seeing the flirting. And for me, I had never dealt with anything like that before. And I was like, wait, this is not right. And so I'm not one to be shy about my needs or feelings. So I would voice them and be like, hey, this isn't cool. Like I see you flirting with these girls in front of me. And that's when the process of gaslighting started beginning. And for somebody who doesn't know what gaslighting is, it's basically when somebody takes you so off guard and they put something that's so clearly on like their fault onto you. And it's happened so quickly that you don't even know really what to do. You're like, wait, this is so clearly not me, but is it me? And it eventually if you are gaslit enough, you start questioning your own sanity, which is a part of my story and a really sad part of that journey.
Who was this guy? How did y'all meet?
Yeah, we met, oh gosh, back in the day of Facebook before Instagram even. Like this is like, I think at a concert and then in college at some point. And I had a different boyfriend at the time, but he actually unfortunately did work for a church. So, that's a part of the story that's really hard.
What do you mean he worked for a church? Like a pastor?
He was not a pastor, but he worked on staff
Okay.
in a certain department. Not as a pastor, but he worked for the church in other ways.
Were you able to bring it up to people's like attention when the abuse was obvious to you?
Yes. So I did. And that's part of the journey that actually is really tough because I shared with some of my pastors. So I moved cities during this time, moved churches, all of that. And I brought this eventually. There was a lot of shame on my end, a
Sure.
lot of like denial, a lot of, I can't believe this is happening. When I did feel the courage to bring it up to a small group leader, I brought it up to a small group leader. She was amazing. This was after, and I don't want to be maybe too explicit unless I can be, but it was after a really horrible night of abuse. And that I won't go into all the details because I don't want to trigger anyone, but it was really, really horrific. And I had bruises and things on my body. And I had a friend, I actually was so in shock that it was a Sunday during the day. And I was so in shock that I went to church right after. Like I didn't know where to go after it happened. I was like in a place of shock that I went to church. I didn't even fix my hair. I didn't even look at myself in a mirror. And I walked into church and some of my friends saw me and they're like, whoa, 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 what happened? Because like I have black and blue marks and different things. And so I was like, oh my gosh, it hit me like what had happened. And I started crying and I opened up to just a few people who then convinced me to call the police. And that's where I got a restraining order on this guy. And so after the restraining order, I did speak to somebody in the church and at my small group leader who heightened it to somebody else in the church community. And I was told that there was going to be specific actions taken. And basically, those things never happened, unfortunately.
Wow.
And so I broke up with this guy for a season, and the story is very complex and long, so it depends on how much you want to go into it. But we did end up getting back together, and then it ended again in a very horrific, abusive night. And eventually, the relationship ended after that, and I did not feel safe at this church community. And so a friend of mine found out, and I had just gone on a vacation with the pastor of this church who was marrying two friends of mine. And so I had spent some time with him. And so a friend of mine convinced me to go and tell this pastor and his wife. And I took every courage in me to go and tell this pastor and his wife. And I was so nervous. I still remember that day so clearly. And the pastor cried and wept, and he prayed over me, and he promised me a lot. And I know there's a lot going on. I will not say the pastor because people know who it is. But basically after that, I never heard from them again, and nothing ever happened to the guy. And he then got on staff at that church community after that as well.
You're kidding.
So I left that church for obvious reasons and started going to a new church.
Wow. Kate, I'm so sorry. And there's so much there, and we
really
could dig.
hard circumstance.
Yeah, we could dig deeper into that for sure. But wow, I'm just so sorry that all happened. Not just the abuse, but the church's inaction and broken promises.
You're the first person that's ever asked me that on a podcast in all these years. So thank you for asking.
No, it's devastating, and just doubly devastating when the church doesn't act like the church should in these situations that are so obvious. And where the answers are so obvious, and we just, I don't know what it is. It seems to be an epidemic of sorts in a lot of churches these days, but I'm sorry that happened to you. What did you learn, particularly kind of bringing it back to our topic here, like what did you learn about that and coming out of a situation like that, how to retrain your mind around dating and things? Like what are some of the tendencies you picked up on around, as a victim of abuse? What are some of the common sort of stumbling blocks for folks in your situation trying to start dating again?
Yeah, for anyone who's in that circumstance or who has been, the stat is that on average, an abuse victim will go back to their abuser about 7 or 8 times on average. And I went back more than that. We broke up numerous times, but I went back probably like 20 to 30 times. And so I was definitely a part of that stat. And so people around you don't really understand what's going on, because if you explain to somebody what's happening, if you have the courage to explain to somebody, they're going to, if they don't understand abuse and they've never dealt with it before, a lot of times they're going to say, just don't go back to that person. Like, they're awful. Like, why would you go back? And you don't understand like how much of a mind game there is happening and how low you think of yourself because of most likely the emotional abuse that is almost always attached to physical abuse. You start thinking of yourself very, very, very low to the point of you have very little self-esteem at all. It is very hard to release yourself from the abuse cycle. And there's a cycle that keeps you stuck. It's almost like a drug. I try to tell people, like, when I started seeking therapy after, my therapist was like, hey, this kind of like the addiction cycle. And so you don't want this thing because you know if you take it or go back to it, like it's going to destroy you and be horrible and hurt people around you. But there's something that just keeps you going back. And there's something psychologically in the abuse cycle that keeps you going back, even when it makes no logical sense. So that was really helpful for me because my therapist helped me to realize like I had to remove every element of seeing this person and any temptation and even friends that were attached to this person. For me, for a season, I had to remove myself entirely from all of that. So the blessing in all of this, Eric, was actually that I did switch church communities. Not that I would recommend that for everyone, but for me, it allowed me to be in a safe community. I had a new community of friends that were actually way more supportive and understanding. And I got to really separate myself from this person. And I don't think that has to be the case in every circumstance that you like change churches by any means, but you want to cut yourself off from this person entirely in every way possible. Do not go to an event where you think they might be there. Like avoid any place that you think they may be there, because you'll get triggered and it might send you into a really dark place.
Sure.
And also know that the process of healing may take a very long time. For me, at minimum, it was a year or more before I didn't feel tempted to reach out to him anymore.
Yeah.
And so it took a long time. It wasn't like, this is over, done, I never looked back. Like thinking of the process of addiction and healing from addiction, right? That takes a long recovery cycle of people who go to AA and things of that nature where they're really trying to seek recovery from something that felt like their whole life was around this thing. And so it took me a year and a half to be fully separated and not feel as tempted to reach out to him. Blocked him on everything, like asked my friends, do not bring this person up at all.
Right.
For me also, Eric, I had to separate myself from dating and men for a long season.
Okay.
I realized in this process that I do not blame myself for what happened in that relationship at all. However, I can recognize the ownership on my side. I can recognize that before getting into that relationship, there were belief systems that I had about myself. There were ways I was being self-hating to myself internally. There were views I had about myself that led me to be more susceptible to believing the lies of this abuser.
Sure.
And so I had to realize for myself, I need to figure out who Kait is outside of men, outside of dating. I need to know who God says that I am. Because at that point, I felt so much shame, and I needed to figure out who is Kait with God. Period. End of sentence.
Is it common for someone coming out of a situation like that? I mean, I know you're saying like avoid that person, but is it common for people in a situation like that to find someone else who's the same profile, like the same type of person, and just end up in another similar situation? Like maybe subconscious traits that you're drawn to because of your whatever unhealth exists in you and whatever flawed thinking exists in your mind. Like you just end up making the same mistake but with a different person. Is that common with abuse
100%.
victims?
Yeah, usually with abuse victims and people in general, like you're usually trained towards a certain kind of person, and oftentimes it comes from childhood woundings, and you don't even realize you're not even conscious to it. And so, yes, of course. And I did date abusive guys after this guy. They weren't as grossly abusive.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't physically abusive, but there was emotional abuse or cheating or betrayal in future situations with men. And so, but I do believe, and what I want to empower people is like, you can, if you really analyze your own wounds and what has gone on in your life to make you attracted to somebody like that in the first place, you can retrain your brain. You 1,000% can, and you can learn what signs and signals will be going off with somebody who potentially may be abusive. You also need like really strong systems of wisdom. And I did not have that. I didn't have systems of wisdom.
What systems of wisdom are you talking about?
So what we talk about now is we have like a life board of advisors, and we teach that on one of our program. And what I mean by that is having certain people on that life board of advisors, which can pour into you, that know all parts of you, your struggles, your story, your past relationships. And these aren't necessarily peers, maybe one or two peers, but this is an older, wiser couple that is a couple you want to model your life like, or your future relationship like. This is ideally a spiritual director, spiritual mentor. This might be a therapist. These are people that you have specifically sought after for wise counsel. They are your bumper system. So in life, and especially in relationships, and especially if you've been through abuse, you need that system. And I did not have that system.
Right. Most people don't. It's pretty rare, I would think.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing all that with us. And sorry to just keep pounding away with the questions, but
No,
I'm
it's
just really
good.
curious about your background. And JJ, now it's your turn, brother. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, specifically with dating prior to meeting Kate?
Very different. Very, very different. And it's also ironic that we, teach together now on it. But I actually enjoy that because of the fact that Kate's testimony reaches lots of men and women on a heart and soul level.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, my story might reflect the other half of the population, in the sense of I grew up as a missionary kid. My parents didn't allow me to date until 16. I didn't even date and take advantage of that, in the sense of it was really practical, in the sense of I'm like, okay, I'm 16, 17, I'm graduating in a year. Why would I start a relationship only for me to, have
Literally
to do...
opposite mindset. I'm like, yes, let me date everybody. And Jay was like, why would I do that? That's not logical.
Exactly. So that was kind of the foundation, like very pragmatic, very practical about it.
Were you overseas? Like your family was missionaries. Were you overseas somewhere?
No, we came back.
Okay.
We were in Belgium when I was born, and I was raised till about 5 years old. My parents were missionaries for about 20 years in total, in West Africa and in Europe.
Wow.
But Tennessee was home base.
Got it.
We grew up in Tennessee, much more pragmatic and practical about dating in that sense. My dad was very, very clear.
Yeah.
Do not waste your time. And then for me, I think I woke up around 26, 27 years old after just kind of praying and being on the sidelines, maybe casually dating, but really nothing of any kind of major extent, with just kind of like beckoning, like a highlighting of what I would just call Holy Spirit, just saying, it was almost like Lion King, it is time, with like, I just woke up and I can't explain it, but I'd been praying about it. Like, God, if you feel like this is a good time, I want to date when you feel like it's a good time for me, not when I think, in that sense.
Yeah.
And so I started dating more and more, a little bit in my church community, a lot on the dating apps. And then Kate and I met, I'd say maybe about a year later after that, a year and a half later, in the middle of COVID, on a Zoom call, which was an awesome experience.
Wait.
We started.
Why were you on Zoom together? What happened?
Well, I imagine what you just heard, right? She's obviously a very gifted speaker.
Yeah.
And she was speaking at the Galentine's conferences and Galentine's nights, where it's the girls who are single on Valentine's Day.
It's a happy bunch.
Exactly. Yeah, super, super happy. This one, though, was actually happy because they're all in college, 18 to 24 years old. So they were actually happy.
Yeah.
And then Kate was speaking at the keynote. And so it was friends of mine who run this college ministry called Delight Ministries, based in Nashville. Amazing group. And they had bachelors come on and do blind dates for the first 10, 15 minutes.
Fun.
Oh, man.
Just as an icebreaker, which
These
is really
girls
fun.
could apply to go on a date with one of these handsome bachelors. JJ
I know.
being one of them.
It was meat market, like come out on the block and show off the men.
Yeah.
So I did my blind date, and they invited the guys to stay, watch the keynote, and I saw Kate on the pre-call. And I tell everyone, she was the most beautiful 4x6 digital pixels I've ever seen. And I was, very intrigued. But then I heard her story, much to what you just heard just then.
Yeah.
And just how much healing and who she was in Christ today. And I was like captivated by that character. Because if it was just based off looks alone, or how charismatic and fun she was, I probably would not have asked her out. But I heard...
Wait, I'm
her
confused.
Story.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So most guys I was expecting you to say the opposite. Like, based on her looks alone, I totally would have been in, but then I heard her story.
No.
So what is it about you that, because I'd say 9 guys out of 10 probably would have said that the opposite way.
I mean, dude, and I would have said that. I hope I can call you dude. You seem
I like that.
You know,
yeah,
very
makes me
easygoing,
feel
yeah.
young and hip like you guys.
There you go. Well, you know, in college, I had this guy who, you know, very attractive, handsome. I played football with him. You know, he could have gotten any girl, and he ends up dating this girl that most people would not have pictured them together. And I just
My
remember
kids would say
asking
she's
him,
mid. She's mid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
she's
got it.
mid. Yeah. Yeah. So, and he had the Riz. Right. So, this is Gen Z talking.
Okay,
Yes.
this
I'm
is
with
above
you.
my head.
No,
I
I've
have
been
a hard
studying
time
this stuff
with
all
myself
summer.
over
Yeah.
So
here.
anyway, I'm like, dude, like, what's going on here? Like, you know, does she have? No, I'm just kidding. He goes, you know, man, like, I'll be honest with you, because he was like, you clearly don't get it. She loves Jesus so much. It is the most attractive thing I've ever seen in any girl I've ever met. And my mind was blown because I never heard it put like that, especially from a guy who could have gotten almost any girl he wanted.
Yeah.
And from that moment, I was like, that's what I want.
Wow.
That's my top priority. You know, we teach like 5 buckets of attraction, and the spiritual attraction is that top priority. And so, based off looks alone, I would not have asked her out because I didn't know her. And I didn't know where she was at spiritually. And I didn't know what her character looked like. And I didn't know how much she loved God. And for me, I was maybe a little bit more selective on just who I would ask out on a date from that perspective.
Yeah.
We definitely teach people to be open and, you know, de-escalate. It's not a marriage proposal on the first date. But you can be a little bit more selective. Like, go out with someone who you think and know loves Jesus, at least off the first
De-escalate, though,
perspective.
sounds like a hostage negotiation.
I know.
To de-escalate the situation.
Listen, man, like the way I dated coming out of the gate, I was like, this was a marriage proposal. Like
Oh my gosh.
I took every date so seriously. The first date, I was like, you know, I was so arrogant too, in the sense of like, I could tell you whether or not I could marry a girl off the first date. And I'm like so arrogant in the sense of just writing women off left and right in
Interesting.
small group before I even asked them out, you know, in the sense of I never gave them a chance.
Yeah.
I never even just went in with a curious, casual mindset of like, how can I just learn more about her, right? Instead of just looking for things I don't like about her or that might annoy me or perturb me. So,
Trust me,
So-
there'll be things that annoy you.
yeah,
So I think I've heard Kate say that on the podcast something similar, which is something she's called dating the unexpected, I think.
Yes.
And Kate, was this an example of that? Like, were you into JJ right away, or like how did that work for you?
I was not. So, okay, to be fully transparent, I was doing a dating challenge. And so now you know some of my story of abuse,
Yeah.
like serial dating, all this stuff. So for me, I jumped into relationships very fast and often blindly romantic at heart, all those things. I also have a struggle with mainly anxious attachment style, if you know anything about attachment theory.
Educate me. I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Oh, it's amazing. So attachment theory, there's 4 different kinds, and it was developed by, the concept was developed by John Bowlby, but it's all about how the love you received in your childhood really dictates how you then receive and give love later in life. And so if you had 2 parents, and I'll just give you the anxious example because we could go a whole hour talking about it, but if you had 2 parents that were like, one was not very attentive and the other was maybe pretty attentive, you learned that you would get some consistent love, but not all the time. So it would be there sometimes, but not all the time. And so for somebody who leans anxious, you think, oh, is it going to be there or is it not? Is it going to be there? Is it going to be not
Right.
there? And so you kind of like are always on edge, like
Yeah.
never sure if this thing is going to stick around or if it's going to be consistent. If you have someone who leans more avoidant, which is the opposite of anxious, they probably had 2 very absent parents or a parent that was incredibly overbearing or a helicopter parent. Or a parent where they weren't able to really share emotions at all, where it wasn't safe. And so they learned sharing emotions, feeling, and all of those things in relationship is not safe. So I'm just going to turn off from all of those things. And so that's kind of some of the basis. So I struggle with more anxious attachment. Fun fact, like almost 50% of people struggle with anxious attachment. And there's two other kinds of attachment style, but ambivalent and secure.
Okay.
Obviously, secure speaks for itself. And ambivalent is like a combo of anxious and avoidant.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, for somebody like me, struggles with anxious, leans into relationships really fast, and then like wants to hold on to them for dear life. I realized, and I talked to my friend, Dr. Henry Cloud, who was like, Kate, you need to do my dating challenge. And I was like, okay. And I had read about his dating challenge years before, but I was like, I'm not going to do that. And so I did this dating challenge for myself, and which just meant that for 90 days, I was going to go on dates and not commit to one person exclusively. For me, that was a win because, again, I used to jump into relationships
Right.
super fast with not the right people.
You were breaking the pattern, basically.
Yes. So I was breaking my own pattern. And for some people, this is helpful. If you're an avoidant leaning person, this is not going to be a win for you because you're going to love this and say, I never have to commit to anyone ever. So people listening, just take note of that. This isn't for everyone. But for people who have that tendency like me, it could be helpful. Now, you have to be clear with people up front. You're not making out with people. There's so many rules we have in this if you do something like this. But I was already talking to 3 different guys, going on some dates with 3 guys.
Yeah.
JJ rolls around, and I'm not even open to like talking to anyone else. 3 was good enough. I was in a good spot. It was like 45 days in. I'm good. JJ rolls up, and he is 5.5 years younger than me. He had blue hair. He lived in a different state. He had a black earring. And when I went to his Instagram to do some light acceptable stalking, it was the weirdest Instagram because every different photo was a different hairstyle and a different look. I was like, I don't even know who this guy is or what he really looks like. But what I could see, and seeing past all that, was I liked that he didn't care what people thought about him. Because most people who care what people think about them are not going to post those kinds of photos all over their Instagram.
Right.
And I appreciated that. I liked that. And so, you know what? I said, fine, I'll give this young chap, if you want to go Gen Z simp.
This whippersnapper.
This
I wasn't
young-
a simp yet.
This young
Yeah.
simp, one date. And I don't even know what a simp means, to be honest with you. I just
No, you're okay. You're all over it. It's fine.
It was close. Yeah.
you know? And I gave him one. I was like, we'll see. I'll give him one date. I didn't think anything of it. And here we are. So, but, you know, for me, it did take a little bit of time to be fully interested in him because he was younger. And though he was super mature, he also had the weird blue hair and so many factors that was just, to be honest, not my quote unquote type. Not somebody who I would have seen at church and been like, ooh, yeah, I want to talk to them.
Right. Mostly based on just what was physically apparent, like he was younger and the hair, obviously, and all that. But you hadn't really gotten to know him yet at that
Exactly.
point. So
Yeah.
interesting how you both had so different reactions to each other. But initially, you both thought this is not something it's not someone I would date normally. And yet,
Yes.
the more you leaned into this, I guess you learned more about each other. Tell me about how that unfolded and sort of how this became a thing.
Yes. By the way, my sweatshirt right now says unexpected, so I don't know if you can
Hey,
see that.
nice.
But this is like the whole date the unexpected, thing.
unexpected.
So there
Yeah.
you go. Yeah. So how did our relationship unfold?
Well, so funny. I mean, Kay didn't hear me give a keynote. She didn't know much about me.
Right.
And the one thing that we say all the time is character shines over time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we encourage to date over time. Because you get a good snapshot of who that person is in the sense of, you know, when the charismatic or quote the Riz, you know,
Right.
kind of fades away.
Yeah.
They're introverts. You know, I'm not introverted, but you know, introverts are a really good example. Over time, you get a really good idea of who they are.
Sure.
And more importantly, we see people rush in so quickly. They don't even know the person who they're starting to date and get into a formal relationship with. So we say, you know, character shines over the time, so there's no rush to jump in. And more importantly, you know, you just have to give it time to see who you're really dealing with because anybody can pretend
Sure.
to be anybody
That's
for
right.
about 90 days.
Truly.
We see something like magical happen just at that 90-day mark.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really, really
We see
bizarre.
a lot of relationships or dating situations where after 90 days, more things get revealed. It just happens over and over.
It's crazy. So that's just our rule of thumb. Some people say 3 months, 6 months, it just kind of depends and changes. We
Yeah.
just love that 90-day mark. But
so
we
she-
started going.
Kate had
go
a
ahead.
little bit of a head start on you. I mean, you had a head start on Kate actually by getting to know everything about her during her talk.
Yeah, and she had a book about her whole life, you
Yeah.
know, her abuse story, her redemption story, her healing story, and I read the book,
Yeah.
with permission to clarify.
He did.
So there is ample content about Kate.
Yeah.
Which was, a challenge in itself. But I also knew that that wasn't all of Kate, right? That was a snapshot of different moments and stories in her life, but it wasn't all of who she was.
So you started pursuing her right away?
Yeah, we started going on FaceTime dates. So we did FaceTime for
COVID,
about.
baby.
I
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I loved it. So we did FaceTime and long distance for about 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then after that amount of time, we were both praying that it would be clear or not on whether or not it was a good time to visit and actually see.
Yeah.
Right? So I went down to LA and we had a wonderful, I would say 4 days together, in the sense of like, when you go to see someone like that, to clarify, we love long distance. Long distance is awesome because it really weeds out serious relationships and serious matches and contenders. Like if Kate or someone was down the street, you can casually date because it's very low cost, right?
Right.
But if I live in Seattle and she lives in Florida, I'm not gonna casually date for fun, right? After a month or two, like you have to decide pretty quickly: is this person worth investing in or not?
Did you feel
So I went
like
down.
JJ? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you
No, you're
feel
good,
like?
man.
Did you feel the hesitancy from her about you not being her type? Like, was it hard for you to convince her to give you
No,
the time of
not
day?
at all. Yeah, not at all.
Okay.
I felt the hesitancy off the bat, and it didn't bother me at all because I was sure about who I was. So I wasn't looking at her for any validation,
Yeah.
or any opinion on JJ. Like I knew who I was,
Yeah.
and I knew what I was sure about, and I also knew that I was in a fun phase of fashion in my life. Like I always knew that my cleanup days were coming.
I
So-
definitely asked him that question on one of our dates. Though. I just was like, so I'm just really curious to know. You have unique style, and I want to know how important fashion is to you.
I was
Is this
like,
a
not at all.
phase or is this a forever?
Yeah,
thing?
that's
Yeah, like,
exactly
is
what
this
she asked.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
he basically was like, oh, this is like, my woman can dress me however I want one day. And I'm like, really?
All right.
Yeah, she heard that and her hands just started going,
I'm
really.
like, praise God.
But no, that's really how I felt. I knew one day, right, I wouldn't be able to dye my hair any color
Yeah.
or wear earrings or whatever I wanted. I knew one day that was going to be coming. So I was happy to forfeit that if it meant pursuing Kate in that sense. It wasn't
Yeah.
a top priority for me. So I was pretty sure about her, and that's the one thing by far and away we think and teach and preach is there's no substitute for the guy being sure about the female and wanting and being ignited to pursue her. Like you hear story after story of the guys hanging around however long it takes, like Jacob, like they have the object of their eye, it's set,
Right.
and they're willing to wait to pursue. You don't necessarily hear the opposite often at all. Like the girl was super sure about the guy. She consistently waited and pursued him, was just faithful, and he was super unsure, super unattracted at first, but warmed up over time. And they got married. You don't
Oh,
really
right.
hear
No, you
that
don't hear
story
that. No. Yeah.
almost ever. I'm not saying it can't happen. So we just we are big believers in the sense of the guy doesn't have to know after the first date. Like we're not talking
I'm
about
not
that
talking about
crazy
knowing
amount
if
of pressure.
you're going to marry them. Just
Yeah.
knowing that you want to pursue them.
Right.
And there's an ignition in your heart, so to speak, towards that person and a
Right.
fire to pursue them on the
Right.
guy's end specifically.
So your advice
Kind
to
of-
guys is like, if you don't have that, just stop. Like, don't waste her
Dude,
time, your
so-
time, whatever. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, I played quarterback. Let me put it this way: I played quarterback. More of a pro style guy. I like sit in
Yeah.
the pocket. Every now and then they would ask me to run the ball or think about running it. So we'd run the zone read where
Sure.
everyone blocks down, and it's me looking at the defensive end, and he'll come up, and if he starts chasing the running back right away, I'm going to pull the ball, I'm going to tuck it, I'm going to get about 4 yards.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also played quarterback,
Now-
but it was just the 7th grade, so we didn't do a lot
Okay,
of
there
zone
you go.
reads.
Well,
Yeah.
so if you made it a little bit longer,
Yeah, I know.
if that career would have panned out. But if that defensive end is good and he's doing his job, he's going to take 3 steps in and 3 steps into the middle, and he's going to play it really, really ambiguously. And my only rule in that scenario is if it's gray, give it away. That's the only rule for quarterbacks, especially if you're white and pretty unathletic and slow. If it's gray, you give it away.
Yeah.
So I tell the same thing to guys. Hey, listen, if it's been 3, 6, 7 dates, if it's been about a month, and you guys have actually been going on dates and it's gray, I understand it's hard and you really want to be patient and give this girl a chance. But for the one that I would love to call my wife, don't you want to be ignited? Like, don't you want to be like really tenacious and kind of sure? Not like the mistaken infatuation, all about what she does for your life and how hot she is and all these things.
Yeah.
Like, don't you want to be ignited and sure about her character and like who she would be as a wife? So I just say, like, at that point, it might be hard. It might be unclear, and it does work out sometimes. But if I had to give prescriptive advice in that sense, I just say if it's gray, like, give it away.
Yeah.
Because another guy is going to be ignited to pursue her, and if you're not in that boat up front, that's okay. But it's probably time to just cut bait and let it go.
Here's a question, and this is I don't mean this as any kind of like criticism of this approach. I just want some clarity. Yeah. It feels like that could lend itself to more of a feelings-based approach to dating. Like, if you don't feel it with this girl, you need to move on and let someone else feel it for her. And I do get that. I think attraction is important, whether it's spiritual or physical or whatever it is. But I think sometimes, because the issue in the modern scene is like so many options, it's like I feel it, but not enough. I feel it, or maybe I don't feel it as much as I would if I went and back to Tinder and found someone hotter. Or, like the unlimited options could be prohibitive in terms of like anyone ever locking anyone down or like, anyone ever.
You're right. Because here's the reality. It's so funny you say that. And I actually agree. You know that today, right now, we are more single than ever before in history.
Yeah.
We have an adult population that's 51% single.
Right.
What's ironic about that is we actually have more options than ever before. Like, exponentially more options than like your local bar and church and neighborhood. You could date all across the world if you want. It's very, very normal and socially acceptable to date domestically in the U.S. from state to state.
Passport bros.
People, yeah, exactly. People are more open to long distance than ever before. So it's not a lack of choice issue. There is a degree where we're just not making the choice.
Oh, it's an abundance of choice problem. Like, the more choices you have, the less likely you'll make a choice.
Right.
I just want to say, too, something we specifically teach, like in our intensive programs or talk about on our podcast, is also like trying to help people figure out why they've been picking unhealthily, why they're not staying in relationships, why they're afraid of commitment. Like, you need to come in with a healthy vision of dating, what you're looking for in a healthy capacity. And like, if, for example, you're a man that has a high addiction to porn, or you put physical attraction ahead of so many other things, we have to get those things in line before you're dating. So this isn't necessarily advice to just like the average Joe. It's, hey, when you need to do this kind of healing work, we teach and really help people work through their types and rethinking their types and really having a healthy view of why they're attracted to certain people and who they should potentially be attracted to. And so after doing that work, then it's like, okay, take JJ's advice. But if you're just sitting there and you maybe lean more avoidant and you kind of, you love the options, then the gray give it away is going to lead to somebody who potentially just never commits. And you see like the 45-year-old guy with Peter Pan syndrome. Sorry, that's so mean. But like, who literally is like, yeah, I'm just still single and I can't find options. And I'm like, all right, yes, we got to fix some things there,
Yeah. And I'll tell you, that's a tough case to make for somebody who's not in love with Jesus, or who's not serious about their faith and doesn't have any sort of higher reason to love a woman well. I'm picking on guys only because I'm a guy and I know guys more than women. And like a lot of guys, it's hard to sell them on the benefits of marriage these days. Like, it's just hard to sell them on the value added to them, because most of them, I'm talking about nominally religious guys, like sort of halfway Christian guys, or non-religious guys that are they're getting sex already. or at least they're getting unlimited porn, whatever kind they want, whenever they want,
Right.
whatever. Or some of them are actually getting sex with women, on demand, basically.
Yep.
They're doing great at work. They don't really care to have kids, or they know that they could have kids at 50, unlike a lot of their female counterparts,
Right.
And so it's like, why? And if you don't have a commitment to be faithful and to raise a Christian family, if you're not a serious Christian, it's really hard to figure out why. I think that's part of the reason why so few people are getting married. Women still seem to be more attracted to the idea of marriage, but I think that's about biological clock issues, maybe more.
Exactly.
And men are just checking out. And I think this is sort of up in the ante for Christians and churches, like you mentioned earlier, Kate, to talk more about the value of dating and the values we should have while dating. It's because it must be about marriage and raising a new generation of Christians that will change the world in Jesus' name.
Yeah, well, a great why, and that was so well put. A great why would be 1 + 1 = 3. As far as a case for marriage, 1 + 1 = 3. And if I am a Christian and I do love Jesus, my top priority is the kingdom and producing and working in the kingdom and laboring in the kingdom. Now, and Paul's note on that is, hey, if that is your top priority,
Sure.
you should stay single because that's going to be the most efficient way. Now, there is a reality where I do think that there is a law of multiplication in a kingdom marriage. And so that's why if your top priority, your top attraction is their character and spiritual character and who they are in Christ, that's where as a guy, I'm like, well, if you're looking for that 1 + 1 = 3, that multiplier, you go out with a different lens. And what you're describing is such a real phenomena of, I would just call like a passive life. Like, why would I get married? I'm having fun. I'm playing golf 2 or 3 times a
I
week.
don't need any,
like
it's not extra commitments. I don't have to think about somebody else in this equation.
That's
but
right.
like you can tell, and I had bits of that. I would call like infecting my life. Absolutely, it's hard not to, unless you're surrounded by guys who have that same priority, that fun lifestyle. That is the ultimate priority of the life, is to have as much fun as possible.
That's where you see lots of people, and Gary Thomas says this, who's a friend of ours. He's like, marriage isn't about making you happy. It's about making you holy if you're Christian. But a lot of people are looking for just happiness. I want that fairy tale. Like when I watch the show, and I'm going to out myself, when I watch the show Love is Blind, okay? And I've watched it.
Which one is that?
Love is Blind is where they sit behind, like they can't see each other. So they talk and they go on dates with people and they make a decision on who they want to be with without seeing them.
Okay.
It's just on emotional connection.
Can they lay hands on each other and get a sense of build or anything?
No.
Totally blind. Okay.
It's like you're in two
Love is
separate boxes
blind,
and you can hear like pods and you can hear the other person
Okay.
clearly through the pod. So you can't see them, you can hear them, and it's really interesting. I use it I like watching it for psychoanalyzing why people enter into relationships. But if you've ever watched a show like that, like it's always so interesting why people are drawn to other people. And it's always, a lot of times it's based on, oh my gosh, you would fit in my life so well. Or, oh wow, that's your favorite song? That's my favorite song. Or, oh, we would just like thrive in our lives and be so happy together. And it's all about looking for me, like what's going to fill me, make me feel good. Like you would fit so good in my life. And there's no greater picture to it than that. So when that person fails you, or they're not as cool as you think, or they don't make you happy, what happens? It's what leads to divorce, right? Or just lack of marriages even happening because we have these unrealistic expectations of somebody being able to be like our perfect best friend sidekick for our whole life, which isn't necessarily the point of marriage.
No, that's right. No, it's true. And that's why I think Christians have something very specific and important to say about marriage, because Christianity, at least it's supposed to be, intensely anti-selfish, right? It's like just about loving God and loving others first, and marriage fits in great with that because, people that really stick it out in marriage learn to put someone before themselves. And I think that is so anti-culture right now. But it's something we don't talk about enough from a strictly like Christian perspective. I don't know how marriage survives in the culture out in the world another generation or two, because it's just
I don't either.
doesn't seem to be self-serving enough.
Yeah. I agree.
We'll see, I guess. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. Honestly, I hope I am.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too.
Yeah, but we still have these Christian folks in our communities, right, that need some hope. And so what we've been doing at with Maybe God and with the Story Church is this, we call it the Summer of Love. So all summer long I've been preaching on these issues of sex and dating and marriage and stuff. And with the podcast, we've actually done something called Operation Matchmaker. You know, back in the day, religious communities would matchmake their people in a lot of instances. And I feel like maybe that's our best hope for some of our Christian singles today. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a little silly, but at the same time, it's real because it's so awful out there for so many people, especially Christians that are on Tinder, of all places, trying to find love.
Don't be on Tinder.
Yeah, I mean, or any of them really. Christian Mingle, I've heard, is not that much better. And so it's just, it's just more disappointing because these guys are Christians and they're doing you wrong, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so we've actually had a little bit of success with the matchmaking stuff. We put couples together and like send them on dates and stuff. But I guess at the end of the day, it's sad that we have to do this in a way. It's like sad that it's that bad that people will ask their pastor to set them up with someone and send them on a date. Like I'll chauffeur them. I'll be their chaperone for the evening and stuff like that. It's really funny and kitschy, but people are responding to it. And I think that's because the reality is so desperate. Out there.
Well, there's also something to be said of once there's so many options, it's like analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
And there's something beautiful about, I get analysis paralysis all the time. Too many options and I can't even choose, know? So if somebody's like, hey, Kate, I have a quality person for you. You don't have to go through all the options. Are you interested? I'd be like, yeah,
right.
I trust you. I value your opinion. I value that you probably will see someone's character in a healthy way. Give it to me, versus guessing. And we love setups or matchmaking, and we try to do that personally a ton in our lives.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll connect with you after
Hey,
and
awesome.
see if we can set up some of your single men with our single girls. But
there you go. I'm just learning so much. I'm learning so much about how to be a friend and pastor to folks that are single. But I really like what y'all do around date the unexpected and really pushing back against people's idea of their type. Like my type is this thing, this one little 10 type thing. And I'm curious about y'all's experience with people and their types. So do you sense any differences, broadly speaking, between the mistakes men make when selecting their type and the mistakes women make? Are there differences in what they look for wrongly, I guess?
Sometimes, yes. JJ can speak to the guys. What I often see for ladies, this isn't all the time, but oftentimes our type is derived off of something that was missing in our childhood that we're looking for in another person. And/or it's coming from deficits in ourselves that we're looking for in another person. So if I don't believe I'm very attractive, I want to be with someone that maybe is in a higher attractiveness level than me, because if I'm with them, it will make me feel more attractive. So, but if I'm with a guy who is on the same level of attractiveness to me, and this is all me thinking it, it's not like, it's I'm perceiving how attractive they are and how attractive I am. If I'm with someone who's as attractive as I am or below, that would make me not attractive. And then I would have to face the fact that I really don't believe I'm attractive. So I will only say my type are guys that are X-attractive or have these things, because I'm looking for those deficits to be filled by being with that person versus first healing those things. Similar, I see women, this one always stirs people up, but with height. It's a big one, where women are like, I want a good godly man. And I'm like, here's a guy. And they're like, he's 5'6". And I'm like, oh my gosh, who cares? He's an amazing godly man. And they're like, and the main things I hear with the height one, which is a big one, is I don't feel feminine enough. I don't feel safe. I'm always like, I'm sorry, but I see Tom Cruise in these Mission Impossible movies, and he's, he's got it going on, and he is 5'6". Now, I mean, he's a
keeping the whole world
so we're not
safe
trying to, exactly. Just height does not dictate safety, but really underneath that is a level that they don't feel feminine and they feel insecure about their bodies, right? And so there's something to do with that, where they have to work through that first.
It's really, it's deeper than it seems, right?
Right. And so when you're on dating apps, Eric, it's like, it's so easy. 5'6", swipe left. Like certain ethnicity, swipe left. Like there's certain things where he's not attractive enough. Oh, but he has a great profile. No, he's too nerdy. Swipe left. And I'm like, go for the nerdy guy. The nerdy Christian guy, the solid character that's like a little bit shorter. that's your guy right there.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I always tell women, please be more open-minded and know that sometimes you're drawn to things that really aren't going to help you or make you happy, quote unquote, in a relationship as you think they would. What do you think about men?
Yeah. What about you, JJ?
I mean, ironically, it's not far off. And Eric, I'm sure you could name it. The number one thing that guys look for first and foremost.
Intellect.
Yeah. Personality with quotation marks, right?
Yeah.
Personality.
Man, it kills us. And I think in a lot of ways, like if we just had to look at it from like scientifically and like, a very like objective point of view, like our beauty compass is so skewered. Like with the advent of Instagram and even Photoshop,
Filters.
we just have such an unrealistic idea of what beauty looks like.
Right.
And it's infected us that we think we can go out and find an Instagram model who loves Jesus with all of her heart and soul.
And doesn't have any emotional problems.
And is like likes golf.
And wants us.
Is, right. And that's the biggest miracle that we're actually handsome
And
enough,
they
right?
love football, yeah.
Right. And they love football. They happen to play golf and they're low maintenance.
And
by
they're
the way.
virgins.
Oh, and they
All of
cook,
it.
And
Like,
they're
yeah.
virgins.
Oh, and they're virgins.
And they're working. They make six figures.
Sure,
and
sure.
you can almost be a stay at home.
She doesn't have an expensive lifestyle. I'm sorry.
Right.
If she looks like that, she has an
Yeah.
expensive lifestyle.
So it's just like we have such an unrealistic physical expectation. And I get flack for this because obviously I have a beautiful woman to my left. But I'll tell you this, you know, what's so ironic about that is if you date someone beautiful, and you might have before your wife,
No.
the irony is that
Not
she
so
is the
much.
most beautiful.
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
went out with maybe one or two objectively not as beautiful as my current wife, but beautiful women.
Current wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are they your
my
previous
wife.
At least you didn't say first wife.
My wife.
Yeah.
So, but I'll tell you what, Eric, like, especially maybe on the first date, the second one, the third, maybe one of our first conflicts, that woman could not have been more unattractive to me
Yeah.
than when her character and that selfishness and that inability, right, to just be focused on anyone other than herself.
Yeah.
Right. You just see how the world revolves around them. And this is not coming from a judgmental place. Like, I'm just saying this from an evaluation point, like the emotional and spiritual immaturity started to the surface.
Sure.
And I could not run out of that room faster. She could not in that moment have been more unattractive to me.
Yeah.
And you know what's ironic about that? I always look back and I think about my times in the small groups all across the world filled with women who I might not have gone in and been like, you know, that's a model right there. You know, just they might not have caught my eye initially, but I will tell you one thing. After 3 months, after 6 months, after a year of being in a group with them and seeing how much they just love Jesus, how selfless they were, how patient they were, how kind they were, I all of a sudden would turn around and look at my friend and be like, dude, this girl is so attractive to me. And I cannot tell you why in the sense of her just character. And I don't care if maybe she's not a 10 out of 10 with a perfect body. She has grown so much in attractiveness to me. And that is what I would just tell guys is that is the most attractive.
Which is why you do have to give more people a shot.
Yeah.
In order to see if you can feel that way.
I love what
Go
y'all
ahead.
have to say about that on your podcast about, you know, even if it's just somebody you put in your friend zone, like you've been in a friend zone for a while, like that's probably your top candidate. I've felt that and shared that similar advice with some of my single friends. But, you know, it's kind of going back to what we were talking about before with like if you feel ignited, I think was the word you said, to pursue
Yeah.
someone. It's like, and I think what we're saying the same things, we're just saying it differently. I just think it's a choice you make to be around someone and like, and you feel the attraction because you've made the choice. You don't make the choice because you feel the attraction. And I think that's what you're describing, JJ, with these small groups. Like you chose to sort of spend time with this person, even if it was just in a small group setting. You chose to be around them, and the more you were around them, the more you wanted to choose them. And I think that is one way we break through the paradox of choice, you know, thing we were talking about earlier with all the options that we have. It's like I'm not gonna make my choice until I feel more for someone than I feel for everybody else. It's like, well, that's not quite right. Like, how will you ever know that you feel the most for this person? Maybe tomorrow you'll meet someone you feel more for. You know, it's like
exactly.
You make the choice, and then you feel that more. You know, the more you make that choice.
Yeah,
100%.
and theology goes back and forth on, the idea of the one in Romans 9, and what you can argue is God knows everything before you even decide.
Sure.
But one phrase that really helped me put it in perspective is the only one that exists is the one that you choose. And in that sense, love is forged and
That's
it's
right.
not found,
Ooh.
right? So it's an idea that is built over time and it's choice,
Yeah.
not a divine,
Drop out of the sky moment.
Exactly. Now, I think God can work and highlight, absolutely.
Sure.
And I think there's better options than not. But ultimately, and I've told Kate this, I've laughed all the time. Behind the scenes, one of my controversial opinions is I honestly think that you could marry someone, and if Jesus and the kingdom is their top priority, you can make it work.
That's right.
If that's your priority.
Yep.
And you can have a great marriage. Why? Because that's what was done for centuries.
It was. Literally, they didn't have a choice.
Totally
that's,
agree.
But if you're okay waiting, you can wait longer now than ever before and still, have an idea of a family and a unit. But I totally see where you're pointing to, and I agree, ultimately it is a choice that you just make.
Yeah. Well, and I think, yes, I totally agree. And I think that, if people understood that, it's not about finding your one and only, like your true love or whatever, like Disney's told us. And I think people kind of know this, but still we're looking for it because we want that spark of sparks, It's like, well, you'll have it if you choose the person. And if you choose the person, you both love the Lord and you're both like pursuing him together and you're spending time together, you choose each other, like the spark will spark. It will blow your mind. But if all you're looking for is the spark up front, you're going to have a life full of, 1,000 one-time sparks that went out.
Well, what I'll say to that really fast, Eric, is I heard a pastor say this a long time ago, and it always stuck with me. But when you are married, well, with the whole chemistry sparks thing, you can have chemistry with so many people in your life. You may even have chemistry with somebody when you're married. You may meet someone and say, oh, emotionally, like we really click, or like we just like really quote unquote vibe. I don't know. Is that the Gen Z way of saying it?
That's very
vibe,
good. Well
like
done.
vibe. And you have to make a conscious decision. Just because I have some sort of chemistry with this person of some kind, I'm not talking physical. I'm talking like the other, whatever. And they might be attractive, but that's besides the point. Am I going to say to myself, oh, well, maybe this is now the person I should be with because me and my husband, we've been having issues and that chemistry isn't really there as strong as it was. And I have chemistry with this person, so maybe I should be with this person. There's going to be 1,000 decisions like that you're going to have to make in married life. Like you can have a chemistry or a spark with somebody, and it doesn't mean that is supposed to be your person. I had a guy tell me once when he broke up with me that the reason I'm breaking up with you is because you don't have the X factor. And when I met you, there was just no spark. And, I'm just looking for that X factor. And I was like, oh my goodness. Awesome.
He teed you up for the perfect line. Did you tell him, well, I'm your ex now?
Yeah.
See? You see? That would have been so good.
Gosh, that's
Remember how,
perfect.
you know how you
I
think
did
of all
say
the great
that.
things to say after the fact? Man, that would have been so
Oh
good.
man,
so
that would have
funny.
been awesome. But like that is such an unrealistic way to search for a partner. And I think that's what I see in Love is Blind, and the way the world dates a lot is like so much based on like that initial spark and flame and chemistry. And for me with JJ, it was much more of that slow burn, but it was more, like once it burned to a fire, it was amazing.
Yeah.
But it took some time, and I prefer relationships that start in a slow burn. And I actually think, and I've seen it for so many close people in my life and people we've counseled, some of the best relationships start with that slow burn. And so don't eliminate something just because it's not, a Disney relationship off the bat,
Yeah. They never show you the backstory or the behind the scenes of Disney relationships either when they're like.
They also never show you once they get married. Like,
Right.
what I
There's
mean.
a reason why it ends.
Yeah.
It's like, the
Them
movie
riding
ends
into
when
the
they get
sunset.
married because it's
Exactly.
nowhere to go but down after that. Yeah, no.
It wouldn't be. It's not going to be Disney after that.
Oh,
moment,
man.
I promise.
Yeah, picking up each other's dirty laundry from the floor and stuff and getting mad and frustrated. I've kept you guys for way too long, but I've got to ask you just, if it's okay, one more question or maybe two about sex and singleness, because you talk a lot about that on your podcast. That's really one of the reasons I wanted to have you here, is to talk to people about sex and singleness, because you are rightly frustrated with the church for not speaking into these issues enough. And I'm just curious, if the church were to speak more directly and boldly to single people as far as sex is concerned, what should the church be saying? Like, what do single Christians out there, or even non-Christians, what do single people need to know about sex and dating today?
So we did a whole series on sex earlier in 2023, which I highly recommend for singles to listen to. But we'll both share a little bit of snippets from that whole series. I think often when the topic of sex comes into the room, it's like, singles, close your ears or get out of the room or don't listen to this. You know, it's like this forbidden fruit, which I understand. There is a value to waiting to have sex for marriage, which is what we teach and what we did as well in our relationship. However, I think we do have to have healthy conversations around sex, sexuality, our sexual ethic. We have swung, the purity culture was a hard point in time that really did some damage, though I know it had some good intentions. And so we can't just say, never talk about sex, don't think about it, or you get chlamydia and die, and that's kind of like...
Is that a sermon? I never...
No, I know, seriously. Like, don't even think about it. And that's from Mean Girls, the movie.
Yeah.
But like, literally, that's kind of how it's treated. And I'm like, that doesn't help us. Like, we need to talk about, what do you believe about sex? Like, what is the purpose of sex in marriage? What is sex designed to do? What are some realistic things to expect when you come into marriage with somebody with sex? And I'm not talking necessarily all the explicits. I'm just talking about how we need to reduce the fairy tale of, on my wedding night, I'm going to have the hottest sex in my life, and it's going to be the best thing ever for all of my years. And, our friend Sam Collier said this to us the other day. He was like, before you get married, the enemy is constantly trying to make you want to have sex and tempt you to have sex. And after you get married, the enemy's trying to make you not have sex at all with your spouse.
Wow.
And so
that's good.
I was like, that's real. That's the enemy, like flip-flops as soon as you get married.
It's funny when it's no longer forbidden fruit. It's not even that appetizing, right? It's like,
I know, right?
Right.
It is
I know.
true.
Do y'all,
and
go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, and the reality that for some people and some women who are virgins, like it may be very painful. It may be really hard. And we just have to, when you get into marriage and you have those experiences, like you feel like the lone sheep, and it will cause so many more issues in your marriage.
Right. Because
you didn't talk about the possibility of these things beforehand, and you don't have anybody to talk to about them.
No, exactly what you mean. And I've walked with people through that experience and the disillusionment that comes, and the feeling of like, I'm dysfunctional, and there's something wrong with me or whatever. And it really can, especially early on in a marriage, it can really obviously take its toll. Now, when it comes to singleness, do y'all get specific with singles that are like wondering where to draw lines, physically? Like, what's the advice you give people when they're trying to, figure out what to do and what not to do on the dating scene?
Yeah, we love this question. I mean, the classic question is how far is too far, which is hilarious because the question itself is kind of reflecting the theology and the priority of their life.
Yeah.
Where else in your life do you ask, how much sin can I get away with, in the sense of, and it's still, how much gray action can I get away with?
Sure.
And it not be called sin? Like, how close can I get to the line? And for me, I'm like, well, for me, you just revealed the priority of your life in your question, in the sense of, why is the question not, how can I glorify God as much as possible when it comes to physical boundaries in relationship, right? Like, that right away changes my entire stance and how I act from that point, because the priority and the object of my eye is pleasing God and honoring Him and honoring my partner. So we actually teach, when it comes to the boundaries and the physical boundaries, we can give a prescriptive list. One of the easiest ways to describe like the foreplay is you have an engaged couple and a married couple. The engaged couple engages in foreplay. Maybe they have some kind of version of sex. And then the next day they pray about it. They have to ask for forgiveness and they feel guilty. And then you have a married couple who goes through foreplay. And the next day they talk about how wonderful that sex was, including the foreplay, right? So the foreplay is the on-ramp. And that was part of the whole entire sexual experience. So that one's really easy to kind of address. But I think more importantly, I would just say you have to have a why, a conviction, a godly conviction, and that starts with I think the theology of sex.
Right.
And that's where the church, I would say, is where we dropped the ball is we should be the most pro-sex, champions of sex, most quick to talk about sex in the sense of, it's an amazing thing. And if we wiped all of our assumptions and looked at the Bible and started there and talked about sex, God's not shy about it at all.
Yeah, our guy invented it. Like, it's like we should be like excited about, like
There's only one book in the Bible dedicated completely to the subject, to any subject, and it's a subject of sex.
Yeah,
Song of Songs.
That's right.
And it's like,
and it's crazy.
That is wild.
It's nuts.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's a theology
so God cares
of sex.
about it deeply.
Sure.
And wants it to be celebrated in the covenant.
Right. It's still tough, though, right, to talk to single folks that, aren't dating someone on the way to marriage, and they're just sort of, middling through their, a lot of cases, their sexual peak years, let's say, and don't know what to do with all that, pent up energy and frustration. I honestly still have not found all the answers, but I just think the church needs to come alongside guys and girls that are going through that season of life without a lot of judgment and shame, and just
absolutely.
We have to do what y'all do, which is we have to be vulnerable about our own sexual brokenness, whether we're single, married, whatever. And I think it starts with the pastors going on down the line, the whole church.
Yeah.
And so that everyone feels like the church is a place where they can talk about their sexual brokenness, temptation, whatever. And we celebrate the good and grieve the bad as a community, right? So
100%.
I'm so grateful for y'all and your advice to single people across the board, but especially around these tender subjects that the church isn't doing enough to
We
address.
love it. We love anonymous Q&A. We love talking about masturbation. Like, we love talking about the things, because when we were single and people were scared or hesitant and beat around the bush, it didn't serve us.
Yeah.
It didn't help us.
Sure.
And so as much as we can be transparent and vulnerable, and it advances God's kingdom and serves people, we're happy to go there.
And stewards healthy conversation
Yeah.
within even the singles community. Because we're like, take this podcast or these things and then talk about it amidst your single community and open conversation. So that we can spread healthier dating and like just even getting curious about belief systems we've had in the past.
Right. Well, we've done a lot of topics on Maybe God. We've never covered, the topic of masturbation. I'll run it past the team, and if they're down to talk about masturbation, I'll have you guys back.
Dude, I promise you, the funniest thing about it is the second you start talking about it, like, you forget that it's like a taboo topic,
I know.
And you
Every
can
time
talk about it.
we
It's
talk
so
about
funny.
it, we just say the word so naturally now because we talk about it on different podcasts, and I'm like, I remember back in the day, the first time I asked a pastor about masturbation on one of my podcasts, I was sweating probably profusely before I asked that question, just because of saying the word. I was like, masturbation. I want to ask you about masturbation. He was like, oh yeah, we can talk about that. And it was John Mark Comer, okay? And I was nervous to interview him, by the way.
Sure, celebrity.
But, I'm like, masturbation from John Mark Comer. but now we talk about it so readily that I forget it's kind of a crazy word to say.
There's a little bit arresting or jarring for a lot of people, but you guys y'all are doing great stuff. And if folks that listening or watching right now wanted to find more of you and from you, like where would they go to do that?
Yeah, heartofdating.com has everything. If you are single, we do have a conference later this year happening in Nashville. So we're pumped about that at the end of this year. But our podcast comes out every week. We have an intensive program called School of Dating, but everything's on the website. So if you just go to heartofdating.com, you can find it all.
Heartofdating.com. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, JJ and Kate, I've really enjoyed getting to know you guys, and I'm so glad that our community here on Maybe God has gotten to know you as well. Hopefully, everybody listening will go check out everything that you guys are doing, because it's awesome. And I hope to have you back on the podcast again sometime, maybe for masturbation or any other topic that makes people uncomfortable. So
that's so funny.
You are awesome.
Thank you so much. We had the best time with you.
Yeah, you asked great questions. I had no idea we were going to get into some of that stuff in my abuse story, and I was like, wow, he's asking some great questions.
I
so
know.
Great job.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot, but you guys are such great talkers. And I only got through about half my questions, so we'll have to do this again sometime.
So funny.
For sure.
Thank you, bro.
All right, guys. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.